Party. And I want to thank you for being here as we welcome Joe Pinion to Buffalo as our candidate for the United States Senate to take on Chuck Schumer. And I can think of no one that is better suited to take on the person who is at the heart of everything that is going wrong in our country right now. Because Joe represents everything that is right about America. He's a self-made man, raised by his mother and his grandmother. He grew up in Yonkers, which is a lot like Buffalo, in many ways, filled with working-class families who are trying to make an honest living and to raise their families. And like Buffalo, it too has seen the devastating direct effects of Democrats' one-party, disastrous, pro-criminal, and anti-police policies. Throughout his entire life, Joe has worked to give a voice to the voiceless. He's fought to empower the disadvantaged and the downtrodden. He is the walking and talking embodiment of the American dream. He's not a career politician who's only focused on how he can serve his own interests and to extend his own power. That's the kind of person that we need fighting for New York in Washington, D.C. Chuck Schumer is no longer the senator representing interests here in New York. He's representing a national radical leftist movement. He's a senator representing the powerful Washington special interests. He's a senator that's completely forgotten where he came from and who put him in power. He's a senator responsible for implementing Joe Biden and the National Democrats' radical agenda. And there's nothing more terrifying than that for the taxpayers of this community, which is why it's up to us as New Yorkers, the people with the power, to end his tenure in office this year. Your vote for the U.S. Senate this year is of national significance. If you think things are going great right now, by all means, vote for Chuck Schumer again. If you think he's doing a great job and the country's going in the right direction, go out and enthusiastically vote for Chuck. But if you're like the majority of your fellow New Yorkers who are not happy with Biden's failed leadership and worried about the direction of our country, then it's time to take action. We are in the midst of numerous, too many to count, domestic and international crises. They're getting worse by the day. We have the highest inflation rates in 40 years. Every single American has got a pay cut in the last year, thanks to Biden, Schumer, the Pelosi profligate spending that gives you less buying power every single day. The supply chain problems continue to rage, and there's bare shelves in grocery stores everywhere. Violent crime is surging, and our police officers are under attack from depraved criminals. We saw that just last week as two brave NYPD officers paid the ultimate price to protect our communities. Our law enforcement community is crying out for help as they continue to bury their brothers and sisters thanks to these insane policies that have been emboldened like criminals like never before. But Chuck Schumer, he's not on the side of law enforcement. You didn't hear him come out and say enough is enough. He's on the side of criminals because he's worried about his left flank. He supports the disastrous bail reform laws in the Senate, and he has led the charge on bills that are handcuffing our police and treating them like the criminals. He runs with the support of the Working Families Party, who just yesterday declared war on the NYPD police union. And they said that they will not endorse any candidate that supports the NYPD. Think about that. The dangers of that agenda, they're sadly not just limited, to our shores. American lives have been lost across the world as well. After a deadly debacle in Afghanistan, we are now preparing to evacuate yet another U.S. embassy as Russia prepares to invade the Ukraine. This is going to be the most significant international event, perhaps since World War II. And our president is so weak. He's asleep at the switch. And then Chuck Schumer's there doing his bidding in the Senate. And instead of focusing on the issues that are of grave importance to New Yorkers and Americans around the world, they're busy trying to destroy the filibuster, to federalize elections, and to ram through a new Supreme Court justice, all in the name of extending their power. That's what this theme is. They want more power. Chuck Schumer only believes in protecting his own power. And it's the most tone-deaf, self-serving agenda in modern history. And it's so dangerous to the core principles that this country was founded on. There's only one New Yorker that Chuck Schumer's worried about every day, and that's AOC. In the movement on the left that could offer him a difficult primary and take that power away in the Democratic primary in June. AOC looms over his shoulder and lives rent-free in his head, waiting for the opportunity to primary him if he falls out of line with the squad and the socialist movement in this country. And there's no greater way to send a message that we're rejecting socialism and the radical left than to take out the Democrat leader in the U.S. Senate. Now, we saw this here locally. We saw what that movement tried to do to Buffalo. That AOC was here campaigning for India Walton as she tried to become our city's mayor. Chuck Schumer, in the most spineless move I have ever seen, rejected the relationship of 15 years he had with Mayor Byron Brown, and instead endorsed a candidate that didn't have the resume or the capabilities to run a lemonade stand, because he was worried about the people on the far left, and he was worried about his left flank in a primary. He wasn't worried about how this city would suffer under the terrible leadership that that candidate would have brought forward. He wasn't worried about keeping our streets safe when that candidate ran on a platform to strip $8 million from our police budget. Chuck Schumer didn't give a damn. Chuck Schumer cared about himself, and that is what we've seen time and again. Well, guess what, folks? That comes to an end this year. That comes to an end with the man standing to my right. Joe Pinion has stood forward and said, enough is enough. We are going to change the game, we're going to change the dynamic, and we're going to change the leadership of the United States Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, our next Senator, Joe Pinion.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Good to be here in Buffalo as we make our way all across this state, up and down the corridor, to let the 19 million and shrinking New Yorkers that call this state home know that in this election, for the first time in 24 years, they have a chance to have a choice. We decided to get into this race for one simple reason. We need an America that works for many more Americans than is currently the case. When you look at the pain that is being experienced on Main Street, the chairman talks about it well. Every single aspect of this state is experiencing a surge in crime. Violent crime has spiked here at home and around the country. You look in New York City, we have shootings up 90%, homicide up 30%. 12 U.S. cities hit all-time highs for homicide, and it's all because of the three most dangerous words ever uttered in the modern history of politics: defund the police. Chuck Schumer is the senior senator for New York, but he is also the U.S. majority leader for the nation. For every single man, woman, and child that calls this nation home, he was elected to be and selected to be the adult in the room. He allowed children to hijack a national conversation about justice reform that 97% of Americans, if you listen to Pew polling, wanted, and instead allowed them to run roughshod over that vision for justice reform. And so for me, the task is simple: to let people know that whether you're left of Bernie Sanders, whether you are right of Donald Trump, Chuck Schumer's fingerprints are on everything that has gone wrong in the world as we see it today. And so that means that we have to make sure that we let people know that in this election, your voice can be heard. You cannot sit at home, you cannot sit on the couch, you cannot act as if this is just perfunctory, that this is just some coronation party. 24 years he has been there. You must ask yourself the question: do you feel as if he's been bringing home the bacon as he claims? Because I know many people all across this state feel as if their belly is empty, irrespective of the billions that he likes to wave around on paper. Does that money actually make it into your pocket? He's talking now about building semiconductor plants here in New York. I welcome it. But the hard truth is that that was a problem 10 years in the making that should have been solved 5 years ago, and now he brings it forth as a way to solve his electoral problem for a crisis that we could be facing in the next 12 to 24 months. A crisis that he thinks can be solved by bringing a few thousand jobs to a state that has already lost 1 million residents in the last 10 years because he has failed to deliver results for the people that call this state home. Buffalo, hear me. It does not have to be this way. What we are experiencing is not normal. This is abnormal. And the problem that we face, the sad reality, is that the abnormal has been rendered normal because the people who cannot afford to leave feel as if they have nowhere left to go, as Abraham Lincoln once famously said, driven to their knees by the overwhelming conviction that they have nowhere else to go. Where free people cannot afford to live on their knees anymore. And if we are truly to be the Empire State, that means that we must stand tall and say, quite frankly, that we simply deserve better. When you look at the fact that we have seniors all across this state that call New York home, who just received the largest increase in the history, in the last decade, I would say 2 decades, of Social Security, and find that that increase was obliterated by inflation because of people printing money like there is no tomorrow, debasing the value of the American dollar on policies that make absolutely positively no sense. What value does that have for the American, for the senior who is living on that fixed income, if they no longer have confidence in the fact that the money they set aside to live out their golden days will last them through the next 5 to 10 years? That's a problem that we need to address. When you look at the fact that we live in a state that, for as prosperous as Wall Street has been, we have not seen that prosperity extend to the far reaches of this state. We have a poverty problem in this nation. Over 34 million people living in poverty. 1 out of 3 black children in this state live in poverty. 3 out of 5 in the Bronx. But all across this place, you see the signs of that despair everywhere. And the harder truth is that the people who are experiencing that despair somehow think that there is somebody else worse off than they are. I'm here to tell people that yes, Chuck Schumer may have gone to all 62 counties for 24 years, but he never stopped to notice that the crowds were getting smaller. He never stopped to notice that the barn he took the photo op in front of was getting bleaker because the people who owned the farm were at risk of losing the farm and couldn't afford to put a new fresh paint on the coat. So I think for me, as someone who's been to Colgate University, as somebody who spent a great deal of time upstate, watched the people that I love who live up here leave, watched the people who remain behind acting as if there is no hope, the dairy farmers and the people who worked in the old Kodak factories, the old Carrier factories that are no longer really here in the robust fashion that they need to be. We need people who provide opportunity for those who call this state home. You're talking about what happened at the height of COVID. The people who touch people were the ones who were impacted the most. You start with the police officers. 2021, the deadliest year to wear a badge in the history of this nation. It wasn't the 1920s with Prohibition. It wasn't the race riots of the 60s and 70s. It was 2021, 476 officers killed in the line, 150% increase in ambush killings because we did not allow law enforcement in a time of abnormal conditions to meet that abnormal challenge with the robust public safety response that was required. And so again, that doesn't just impact law enforcement, it impacted those communities that saw those deaths. The smallest majority in Congress since World War II was paid for with the blood of innocent people who simply wanted to go about living their day-to-day life, but it was more important to stay in power than to empower the people. To grant people our first and foremost obligations to be safe in their own skin, safe in their own communities. And so I'm here in Buffalo to let people know that you are not forgotten, that there is somebody in this race who sees your pain, who sees your plight, and understands that government can and should be a force for good, but it requires the leadership of those who understand that their obligation is to the people, not the special interests. And so Chuck Schumer proudly claims to be the senator from Wall Street. I'm happy that we have a Wall Street that works for some, but we need an America that works for all. And if we're going to have a New York that is truly the Empire State, the steeple, as Governor Cuomo famously said, then we need to have leadership that makes sure that we are allowing those people to climb that steeple, allowing the people to actually have a state where opportunity is not just a dream, but a reality. And so, as Bill Clinton famously said, there is nothing wrong with America that cannot be fixed by what is right with America. But first and foremost, to achieve that America, you have to have leadership that actually believes America is a source for good. And if we keep electing a senator who turns a blind eye to those who view America as inherently evil, views those who disagree with them as inherently racist, view those individuals who seemingly do not understand concretely that this place is made for you and me, irrespective of the color of your skin, but solely based on the context of your character, then yes, we will continue to get the same results, and the same results, quite frankly, are not good enough. And so I want to thank everyone who came here today, and want to open this up for any questions you may have, because it's time to get to work.
I mean, Chuck Schumer regularly seeing him win by 20 plus points in these elections, you know, it's the same until it's different, but what makes this year different?
Well, to be clear, number one, I wouldn't necessarily call those elections so much as I would call them coronations. When someone's been in power for 24 years, and over that 24-year period, the three people who you couldn't pick out of a lineup raised less than $3 million combined, that is not a robust effort to make the principled argument. That is a kind of a poor effort to make sure that the word gets out. But also, I would lend some credence to this. In life, your greatest strength often becomes your greatest weakness. Chuck Schumer is not the man that he was in 1998 when he beat Al D'Amato. In many ways, he has become the thing that he fought against. He is now an entrenched creature of DC. He is the face of all that has gone wrong, and as a result, we have the opportunity right now to take this message not just to the people of New York, but to the people of this nation who recognize that what Chuck Schumer does in the name of New Yorkers in D.C. impacts every single American. So far, in a week alone, we've already raised money from 35 different states. We will probably have money raised from every single state in this country by the time we get to next week, because the people of America know, just as the people of New York have felt, that the time for change is upon us. And as I said earlier, if you're unhappy with the world as it currently is, you cannot vote for the architect who designed it. And Chuck Schumer is the architect of architects. He is the corporate Democrat of corporate Democrats who works, again, for those special interests on Wall Street and not the 19 million hard-working New Yorkers that call this state home.
How much support do you expect from the Senate campaign committee because you're running against the majority leader?
Well, look, I'm prepared to sing for my supper, and the hard truth is, look, I've had fruitful conversations with Senate leadership. I think all Americans of good conscience know that when you see something wrong, you say something. And I think that there are a lot of people who are prepared to lift their voice, lift their hands, write some checks, and make sure that we have enough resources at our disposal to get the word out there, to let people know that they have a chance to have a choice in this election, and we will be their champion.
To rephrase that question, do you expect to have more resources because you're running against the majority leader, where these past elections you're talking about, he wasn't in that position?
Correct. I believe in many ways he was able to fly under the radar, because as much as there may have been discontent in the streets of New York City, there may not have been the robust national interest in seeing him removed from power. He now, again, is not just the senior senator from New York, he is the U.S. majority leader for the nation. That is not just a political appointment, it is a moral responsibility that he has to every single person that calls this nation home. And if he has failed in that regard, which I believe that he has, I think that, again, there will be a coalition of the willing to help us build this uncommon coalition, to help have an uncommon outcome, which is victory in November for a person who happens to have an R next to his name on the ballot.
Brian, I will say that I have seen unprecedented interest from the NRSC in this race, much more so than we've ever seen before. Chuck is now the leader of the band in Washington, D.C., and he becomes a much larger target. But I've personally spoken to U.S. Senator Rick Scott, who's the chairman of the NRSC, and he's very committed to seeing us succeed here in New York.
I like the fact that you quoted Dr. King, and you brought up the issue of race here. As you're certainly not the first and last to be a Republican and a conservative who happens to be an African American.
Right.
Do you see any part of your role in expanding the tent? Because people traditionally don't feel that black folk have a place in the Republican Party. So what is your role in terms of expanding this tent and bringing more people in?
Well, certainly. I mean, I've been a teenage Republican before I was a college Republican, before I was a young Republican. Now I'm an old young Republican. But I still think, again, that this party and politics in general can be a tool that brings people together. We chose to launch our campaign a week ago on Martin Luther King Jr. Day for that reason, to make sure that we were affirming dignity for every single American that calls this state home. Dr. King's last endeavor on this earth was the Poor People's Campaign, an endeavor for economic justice for all people of all colors and all creeds. And for me in this race, it's an opportunity for us to say that the plight of poverty should not be partisan, that the plight of children, 34% of fourth graders not reading at grade level, it should not be partisan, to make sure that parents having a voice in the classroom should not be partisan. This notion that you should be able to feel safe in your own home without fear of being burglarized or murdered should not be partisan. The needs that unite Americans are stronger than the divisions that divide us. And if we have politicians that prioritize the robust agreement that all people, nonpartisan, transpartisan, bipartisan agreement that we have on core issues, there's no reason why we can't start achieving that more perfect union that we seek.
Some people might say that's cynical to launch on Martin Luther King Day, your campaign. And also there's this whole perception, I think it says, are you the political equivalent of when people say, oh, the Republican Party's racist, and they say, yeah, but I have a black friend. Are you the Republican Party's, I have a black friend?
Well, I mean, to be quite clear, I don't think anyone would ask that question to anyone unless they were black, which to me is indicative of the soft bigotry of low expectations. In many ways, the same people who say they can't stand white privilege take the privilege to question the authenticity of my views, my commitment to my community, simply by virtue of the letter next to my name on my voter registration card. And so I will say quite clearly here to you and to everyone that the founding ethos of the Black Congressional Caucus, which by the way still happens to be the founding ethos of the Black Congressional Caucus, whether they choose to abide by it or not, is that black people have no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. I'm in this race to make sure that we affirm the permanent interests of black people and all people. But concretely, if we continue to make a permanent friend of Democrats and a permanent enemy of Republicans, our permanent interests will be pushed to the side. And so yes, I think in many ways it's very easy to look at history and say that somehow that this is just history repeating. But I'm here to say it is changing today. It is changing in this election. I have dedicated my life, I've served in the poorest congressional district in this country, helping to provide healthcare services to the underinsured and the uninsured, focusing specifically on youth development. Everything I have done in my life has been imbued by my ability to make sure that we have a political system that works for everybody, but especially those people trapped at the bottom, living at the bottom of the well, as we call it, who have been marginalized, who have been stepped on, who are the downtrodden. So to me, again, our issues that impact people of all colors and all creeds, they are not partisan. They are strictly rooted in the fact that holistically, we take the needs of the marginalized and we push them to the side because it's convenient, and then we leverage that pain for political power without ever empowering the people we claim to fight for. That's not a partisan issue. If voting for more Democrats was a solution to black people's problems, we wouldn't have any problems. So I think to me, this election is about telling people it is not left versus right, it is right versus wrong. And if you think that we are right on these issues, then the time to choose a different direction is now.
It's a heavy lift to beat Chuck Schumer. It's going to be a heavy lift. And I've talked to some political science professor who said he used the word the sacrificial lamb. Do you see yourself as a sacrificial lamb of the party?
Well, to be clear, I didn't leave my job to be anyone's sacrificial lamb. And again, I will simply say that these are not questions that get asked to anybody that doesn't look like me. So I think holistically, when you look at what happens in this race, again, the tenor of how races like this get covered, where again, people feel as if they have the right and liberty to question the sincerity of my effort, to question the sincerity of the race. Is it easy? No. But it's not easy when AOC goes against a Crowley. No one calls them a sacrificial lamb. They say they have the courage of their convictions. When somebody goes out there and says that they're going to take out Eric Cantor and Dave Brat wins that race, no one called him a sacrificial lamb. He said he had the courage of his convictions. At what point do we stop trying to marginalize campaigns and the candidates who run them before they've even gotten underway? Perhaps it would be better to simply say, what is it that you believe in? Why is it that you have chosen to undertake this race? And why is it the people of this state should vote for you? And allow the people to actually have an even-handed approach to exactly why our democracy is the envy of the world, where it is one man, one vote, and the opportunity for the will of the people to prevail.
What role do you see upstate in this election? Obviously, New York City is the population center of the state, but the red parts of the state are up here. How important are they to your path to victory?
If we don't win Erie County and we don't win Monroe County, we will not win this election. I'm here to tell people in Buffalo, in Rochester, that you have a voice. I'm here to tell people that there's no reason we go from having an upstate New York that features one of the earliest cities to have actual streetlights, that features some of the greatest innovation we've ever seen on the planet, that was the birthplace of the Carrier Dome and all the innovation that make the state and make the world possible, and yet we allow that to languish, like the roof of a house just baking in the sun. It's not right. And people being used as, again, this red-headed stepchild, the piñata of politics, because again, you come, you take the pictures, and all people are left with are the negatives, quite literally. So I think for me, this lesson is to tell the people of upstate New York that I'm not here to have a cow on a leash and take pictures. I am here concretely to make sure that the people who own the farm that the cow is on have an ability to make their way in life, have an ability to take care of their family, have the opportunity to make sure their children get the education they deserve. And I think all of those things are people, irrespective of your politics, your political sensibilities, should be able to get in alignment with. We are here to build an uncommon coalition, to find common ground, find common purpose, and tell people that if you're tired of division in D.C., then you cannot vote for the people who keep doubling and tripling down on division, whether that person be with the vested authority of elected office or whether it be your favorite journalist who says they want unity and tranquility and civility.
Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Nick, I got one question for you too.
Okay, we'll do it on the side there. Thank you very much.